Imbalance Part 3. Could they do it again? String together 3 very solid chapters in these comics? It's possible. This is the book I've enjoyed the most since The Rift, easily. The writing, the subject matter, the characters, and with the dilemma the end of Part 2 set up, I could see this one maybe even dethroning The Rift as my favorite. Let's see if they stick the landing. Once again, like this comic likes doing, we pick up right where we left off. Everyone is stunned to hear Toph's proposal to take Leling's bending, but Toph is stunned to hear people are stunned. Leling blew up factories, plans to bankrupt all non-benders. Screw her, take her bending. But Katara claps back, saying taking someone's bending isn't something we can just do flippantly. Taking someone's bending is like removing a part of who they are. And for once, yeah, I'm not on Toph's side. This world is so built up in the fact that bending is a part of everyday life for those who can practice it. They do everyday work with it. They open doors with it. It's part of life. And to strip someone of their ability to interact with the world like they're used to is a pretty heavy subject. Sokka thinks that the one time you did take someone's bending, literally everyone sans the Fire Nation thought it was a great play. There was no two ways around it. Excellent move. But Leling is like just a guy. She's not a world-burning megalomaniac. She's just like a regular megalomaniac. Aang isn't finding much counsel in his friends arguing about this, so he says he has to think about it, and he's gonna have a chat with Leling real quick. So Aang says, "What's up, man?" And Leling still has her weird, smug, evil smile despite being caged like an animal. That makes her feel a little weird. Aang asks what he can do to resolve this issue between the benders and non-benders, and Leling says there's no talking away this conflict. The only way this ends is through her plans. She condescends to Aang in his pacifist ways, mentioning that he didn't even kill Ozai, and oh yeah, we were just talking about that over there actually. Aang says, yeah, imagine that. I beat the Fire Lord, spared him, and saved the world my way. You think I can't sort this out too? But Leling flies off the handle suddenly, yelling that Aang, in sparing Ozai, just cursed him to a life with no bending, and that sort of life isn't worth living. Well, I guess we know how she feels about the subject. Aang says if we can't talk it out, just know you won't hurt the non-benders. Then Leling says, alright, bet. Suddenly back to her evil smile, despite basically crumbling an entire 2 panels ago. Suddenly getting a really weird vibe from Leling. It's almost drawn like she's trying to put on a brave face here, but is actually struggling, but the writing doesn't seem to imply that at all. Over at Leling's house, where her daughters retreated to, genius guys, no one will think to look there, Leling has got her bending back, so the plan is to go rescue Mom. Ru floats a stealthy infiltration mission in the dead of night, but Leling says no. We draw Aang and his crew away from the factory their mom is being held in, and then we go in and lay waste to the stragglers that stay behind to guard her. We obviously can't fight Aang one-on-one. He's too sick with it, so we'll play dirty. And Ru says, yeah, I mean, sure. Time for an Aang-Katara chat about Toph's suggestion. Aang has to admit that it does seem like a non-violent way to end this dispute, but Katara argues the same points I did. Bending is a big part of who someone is, how they identify with themselves and their surroundings and even their culture. Katara argues that sure, it seems non-violent, but is it really? You're doing some serious damage to the person on some level, maybe even a level more important than physical. It's good for Aang to get this perspective, and I agree with it, but the question still hangs in the air. Do Leling's actions warrant such a punishment? And despite Katara thinking one way, she's not the one with the knife. This is for Aang to decide. Satoru comes and interrupts. Oh, what is it now? Did a ladder fall over and you want me to pick it up? Oh, no, there's been an attack on City Hall. Jesus. Apparently the non-bending council members had a meeting today, and wow, that seems kind of stupid if they all know they're being actively targeted. Toph says I'm gonna go kick this building over and get my dad out. And Katara do the fancy splashing. Yeah, they're in there alright. Seems like the doors have been earth-bent and shut. Damn, good thinking on the bad guy's part. Tia, it's nothing to Toph though. She gets everyone out in no time flat, but Aang wonders what this little stunt was. Why just light the building on fire and then bounce? Well, I mean, probably to try and kill the non-bending council members, right? Even though that would go against Leling's plan to do it non-violently to not get the Earth King involved. So that was the distraction that Leling was talking about, if you didn't catch on. Her and her squad of benders are here to bust Leling out. Leling shouts to take out Suki first. She's a chi blocker. I hate that guy. Leling is the first one in, gotta give her credit for that, and she does take to fighting Suki right away, who has a shield. And she has to be at least somewhat skilled with it, considering that time she turned her fan into a shield, weirdly. Remember that? That was weird. It turns out Leling is also skilled in the art of you don't get to play anymore, multiple variations of it even. So Suki and Sokka are basically taken out. All Leling has to do now is beat up this guard, and it doesn't take long for her to be overwhelmed. So she ganks the keys to her mom's cage, and just like that, 20 pages after being caught, Leling is free. The gang get back to Earth and Fire refineries and see that everyone is pretty banged up. So Leling escaped? Yeah, Leling escaped. Also, who are you? And what is this betrothal necklace? You engaged to an earthbender? Katara says Aang is telling all the non-bending council members to stay at Earth and Fire for the time being, so they can be protected. She also helps out this guard with an injury, and she asks, hey, you think that maybe your Kyoshi warrior friend would teach my officers and me how to chi block? That'd be pretty deadly. So Suki and Katara go inside to find Aang holding towels for some reason, maybe small blankets. Anyway, they say Suki is gonna teach the guards how to chi block, and Aang says, oh, word? And Suki says, yeah, word. Aang says, alright. Leling makes it home and is greeted by Ru, who is of course excited to see her. Ru has been packing since they obviously have to get the hell out of Dodge, but Leling says, forget that, we're staying right here. I'm gonna beat the Avatar, somehow. I bet. Ru says, come on, be reasonable, but Leling says no, not again. She explains that they were in Ba Sing Se when it fell. They had to flee from the city and start over. She's not doing that again. Huh. Okay, so Leling's motivation is to make Cranefish Town a bender-run utopia, no non-benders allowed, because the Fire Nation made her a refugee. Does that line up? I thought her backstory would have something more to do with, like, maybe non-benders taking an opportunity from her, or maybe non-benders being given a job and failing when benders would have gotten it done. But Leling goes on to say, or I guess forces Ru to say, the city fell because the Earth King is a non-bender. Oh, that's quite the leap. He says that if he was a bender, he would have had better control of the Dai Li in the city. I don't know, Leling. I don't think you've met Earth King Quay. Even if he could bend, I don't think that would have changed much. He's just kind of a dork. I guess this motivation makes sense in some weird mental gymnastics way. Like, if you look past the myriad reasons the city fell other than that, like, you know, Azula infiltrating the city, or Aang getting killed, or the Earth King's general lack of governing skills, or the Dai Li flipping to Azula's side for almost no reason, or Long Feng having systemic control over the city and enforcing a rule that no one can even mention the war, leaving the city completely unprepared to fight back. If you ignore all of that, and then you're also crazy, I guess it makes sense. Ru says it wasn't the Earth King's fault, it was the Fire Nation. They're the ones that uprooted us, but Leling actually kind of argues in favor of Ozai here, saying that he was doing what any good leader would do, exploiting a weakness. Now, if you think about what that means and apply that to Leling and how she's a leader, and just replace the word weakness for weak, you'll find Leling's philosophy. He was doing what any good leader would, exploiting the weak. Ru finally snaps. She's mad, you can tell because the background is red. She asks if that's how her mother sees her, a weak, helpless person, just because she can't bend. Then we get a panel of Leling literally looking down on Ru. Leling says, listen, I love you and your sister the same, but it's just the natural order of things. Benders are strong and non-benders are not. And that really has to be not the answer Ru was looking for. Suki's teaching the guards chi blocking. Surprised, actually. Knowing how well chi blocking works, you'd think the practice would be a lot more widespread in the first place now that I think about it. Sokka and Aang both think it's pretty sweet, and then they both say we're idiots for thinking Leling was chill in the first place. I agree. I don't know how you missed the evil smile. Aang thinks that if you had just taken Leling's bending, this might all be over now. But Sokka says, yeah, maybe, but there's a whole movement behind Leling. Are you gonna take all of her followers bending too? Where's the line? Aang doesn't know. That's what he's trying to hash out in his head, where the line is. Aang says if you go back to the root of the problem, this all started because of these damn machines. He even likens it to the war, saying the Fire Nation would have never attacked if they didn't have a technological advantage over the other nations. Which is a point that is never brought up until now, but is very noticeably true. A big reason why the 100-Year War was believable and how the comparably small Fire Nation was fighting the rest of the planet was because they just had better shit. The Water Tribe was still going to war in wooden ships while they were engineering football field-sized drills. Really surprised to see this idea brought up here of all places. Aang continues on with these kids in their fucking video game speech, but Sokka once more sides with progress, saying that machines even up the game, and the benders naturally don't like that, but you can't blame the machines. You have to blame the people running around, attacking people, and setting buildings on fire. Aang's like, yeah, no, you're right, I'm just hung up on this whole pollution thing, I guess. No one else seems to care. And Sokka says the Fire Nation attacked because Sozin was a crazy person, not because of machines. Well, I mean, one very much could have enabled the other, but I get the sentiment, Sokka. Aang says he's heading to bed, but Sokka says he's gonna chill and wait for Suki. Turns out Ru is lurking around the corner, though, and tries to dip before she gets spotted, but Sokka says, I see you, Ru, you ain't slick. Ru says, remember how you asked how I could be chilling with my mom and sister attacking non-benders like us? Well, the truth is, I'm not chilling. I'm not chilling one bit. But still, they're my family, you know? Sokka brings up the parable of the Fire Lord and the Banished Prince. It took Zuko a while to come around and seeing that what his family was doing was wrong, but when he did, he made an impact that helped end 100 years of war and suffering. You got a shot at doing something good here, Ru. Alright then, she says, fuck it, I got some mad intel. Check this out. My mom is coming in full force tomorrow to attack Earth and Fire, specifically coming for Aang's ass. She's got dozens of people on board. I guess we're throwing the whole no hostile takeover thing to the wind then. She tells Sokka all of Team Avatar should leave, but that's not happening. Come on. Ru asks Suki for a favor. She wants to know how to chi block too. Hell yeah, I would too. Goddamn. Well, it's the next morning and Aang's on the lookout for this small army that's supposed to show up. A couple of people show up to offer their supplies for any non-benders who have lost their homes, and Aang asks if they're benders, and they say yes, but they're not the ones doing all this whack shit. Leling's posse begins to roll up, and Aang says if you're really a friend of the non-benders, you'll stand with me against this incoming attack from between 20 and 100 people. Who knows? That's a little much to ask, Aang, if you ask me. Like, sure, they're benders, but who knows if they even know how to fight? And that's what the villagers say too. You're a little out of line here, Aang. Also, what the hell is wrong with your ostrich horse? Turns out they had Toph build a cool little maze that the benders will have to get through to get into the factory. That'll be fun for them. Hopefully they don't just like jump up on the pipes to the left of it and go around it, or tunnel under it, or blast through it with earth bending. It looks pretty flimsy. Or burn through it, or cut through it, or if they've got someone who's really good, fly over it with fire bending or water bending. Leling leads them in, greeting Aang, saying he's still on the wrong side. Aang is slightly angry, you can tell because the background is pink. Aang says you've hurt innocent people, and honestly, if you keep posturing like this, I'm gonna have to do some serious avataring here in a second. Leling says take all the non-benders in the whole city and leave. Aang says that's not gonna happen. You'll notice now in this panel, Leling is actively trying to uproot people from their homes. The exact thing that happened to her to set her on this path. Leling says, alright, let's get down to it then. Aang retreats to the back of the maze, and the bending army rushes in after him, and the benders, begging each other for any spare brain cells they might have, realize that mazes have dead ends. Toph shifts the walls of the maze to cut the benders' forces in half, and unleashes her friend she had hidden in the walls. But honestly, could the benders really fight in this close of quarters anyway, with everyone all jammed together in here? Suki and her new army of chi blockers get to work, and I've been thinking, even as a bender, it would be probably pretty good to learn chi blocking too, right? Even if you didn't want to take someone's bending, you could still do the version that Ty Lee knows that just like turns off your limbs. Some benders try to sneak away towards this inconspicuous barrel, but it was conspicuous all along. Katara freezes him. That's 3 more down. Toph's having the time of her life out here, and Leling's getting tired of it, so she sends Yeling to go have her round 2 with Toph. Yeling hits her with a flying clothesline. Whoa, that's wild. Yeling asks, so you can't hear me if I don't touch the ground, right? This question is rhetorical. So Yeling takes to a fighting style consisting mostly of sending herself flying and then coming crashing down on Toph. Toph says she's had enough of this, so she turns and literally runs up the wall of the factory. And like, yeah, it looks like her feet are digging into the wall, like it's definitely a bending move. And sure, it's not as bad as Katara or Zuko being able to fly, but still, the means of traversal with bending is just getting out of hand, man. Also, how strong are your core and quads? Jesus. Toph and Yeling reach the roof of the factory and continue their fight. Yeling chides Toph, asking her if she's going to tell her that this can be resolved peacefully. But Toph says, no, I'm down to fight. And it's a pretty good one, honestly. Most earthbenders Toph dispatches in 1 or 2 moves, but Yeling is really holding her own. Maybe even keeping Toph on the back foot a little bit. The benders make it into the factory. I guess without Toph badger mauling the maze, it was a lot easier. They find Sokka and Satoru, who was ready to die for this cause. They ask Sokka if he's a chi blocker, and Sokka says, pardon? I'm Sokka of the Southern Water Tribe. I'm not a chi blocker, I am the chi blocker. Does my reputation not precede me? The benders think the numerical advantage is good enough, so they'll take their chances. It was a pretty good bluff if you ask me. Sokka domes the lady with his boomerang, but that just pisses everyone off. Toph and Yeling's duel continues, and yeah, honestly, to me, it seems Yeling is winning this fight. Toph seems to be constantly on the defensive. The fight gets so intense they actually break through the ceiling of the factory to where Sokka and Satoru are. Toph slows her descent with a metal cable, which seems like it could come in handy. This is probably a reference to the police force she makes in Korra with their weird Spider-Man cables. The benders that were about to attack Sokka decide Toph is a more pressing issue, but Toph puts those amateurs in their place pretty quickly. Back to the main event. Outside, Leling wonders why they were so prepared for the attack, and Rue tells her that it was me. I told them. Rue lets out some righteous anger, finally breaking and telling her mom she thinks she's horrible for what she's doing to the non-benders. People that are just trying to live their lives, just like they were in Ba Sing Se. Even so, Leling refuses to relent, so Rue takes a stab with her newly learnt chi blocking. She's still new to it though. As far as we know, she doesn't have any combat experience at all, so her mother quickly deals with that little attempt. Leling is so angry with her that she says she's going to bury her own daughter alive. Whoa! Like, okay, I realized that she was a little screwy in the head with her giant leap to it being the fact that the Earth King wasn't a bender that made Ba Sing Se fall, but this is some straight up evil shit. Aang sees the straight up evil shit happening and dives in to help. Back to Earth Rumble 8, Yeling and Toph are still at it. Yeling even gets a hard knockdown and she's ready to run some Oki. And a lot of people don't like this. Toph is seemingly just straight up defeated in a one-on-one earthbending duel. And I get it, but I don't mind so much. You see, the problem with having all of our characters being basically built up as the best benders of their respective elements is that where's the conflict in fights at that point? There isn't any. Is it kind of whack that this ultimately random girl beats Toph in a one-on-one when Toph seemed basically untouchable in Earth duels in the past? Yeah, I gotta agree with you on that, but also our main characters need to be able to bleed or else where's the fun? I think a Toph loss could have been handled a lot better, maybe if Yeling was built up more than just being a pretty good earthbender, but the idea of Toph losing a fight doesn't bother me very much. Anyway, Yeling finally gets to talk down to Toph as she stands over her, mocking her for siding with non-benders when she proclaims herself as the greatest earthbender in the world. But Toph says once again she's not stupid enough to believe she's a better person than Sokka just because she can bend. Yeling's like, who's Sokka? Doing, got her ass, gotta look out for those boomerangs, a lot of that going around recently. Toph thanks Sokka for saving her and then punches him in the arm, and as we all know,
that's how I show affection.
Also, hell yeah, Toph, thanks Sokka for saving you. Be the change you want to see in the world. Katara spots Rue being buried alive and probably has horrible flashbacks. That's not a good feeling. And she's really gonna do it too. Jesus, as her daughter screams in terror for mercy. Aang comes in at Mach 5 though and air blasts Leling away. He picks Rue up out of the dirt and looks back to Leling, who is now towering over them with a boulder that probably weighs like, I don't know, 2,000 pounds. Leling says it doesn't matter if she loses here. Her message will spread. Benders will realize their right of being on top and drive the non-benders from this city, and every city. Leling doesn't want want there to be just a very clear social hierarchy anymore. She's basically fighting for segregation at this point. Aang says, Councilwoman Leling, you and your daughters have devastated the balance of Cranefish Town, and now you shall pay the ultimate price. Aang freezes her solid and rapidly gets two battling opinions. Katara urges Aang to not do it, but Ru says, have at it, she'll know how it feels now. But Katara comes up behind Aang and says you have to take her bending for the right reason, not because it's an easy solution or because you're angry she's hurting people. I think hurting people on a large scale is a pretty good reason, personally. Wouldn't that be like almost the only reason? I like that Katara at least doesn't tell him not to do it here though. She still leaves it up to him, but tries her best to sway him. But Aang does eventually relent. Now this is what I like so much about this plot point. This whole story is about benders of this city oppressing the non-benders due to their natural abilities and having an edge over them. And this last chapter is all about Aang deciding whether or not it's worth it to end the conflict by using a natural ability and edge he has over benders that only he has. The power to take bending away. It's about Aang not knowing whether it's worth it to drop to their level just to end a dispute, which is his job. Taking Leling's bending would threaten all of the other benders with also losing their bending if they stepped out of line. Does Aang want to be like Leling and threaten an entire group of people, some wrongdoers, some not, based solely on the fact that he has power over them? Aang decides that no, he doesn't want to do that. And while sometimes in these comics I wish our heroes had to compromise on their beliefs in more tangible ways, I think the themes here carry Aang's decision to not take Leling's bending to still be a satisfying conclusion. Aang proclaims he isn't leaving this wretched city until all the damage Leling has done is dealt with. And he even finds a way to mention the pollution as well. Anyone remember the pollution, guys? I'm still mad about the pollution stuff, guys. So 20 minutes later, it turns out the fight went pretty well. The benders were all caught and dealt with, and Suki even mentioned she's staying around and bringing the other Kyoshi warriors in to help keep training the police force. Suki brings up the idea of getting some trustworthy benders on the team, but Satoru asks if they really think that benders and non-benders can really work together after all of this. They say, don't see why not. Over here though, Ru's got one of those I've been through some traumatic shit blankets on. What is that trope? Why is that a thing? She looks over to her mom and sister locked up like animals again and thinks she should be in there with them. Suki says, hey, you did the right thing eventually and that's what counted in the end. And I guess that's right. Ru never did anything too screwy. She mostly just stood around as her mother and sister were being assholes. So her getting to be free at the end works for me. Sokka and Aang get to have another chat. Aang brings up his battle with Old Iron, saying that I couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap between spirits and humans, and now I can't figure out how to bridge the gap between benders and non-benders. This Avatar shit is tough, man. Sokka says, hey, we're buddies. I'm a non-bender. You bridge that gap somehow. You'll figure it out. Once again, I get the sentiment, Sokka, but I don't think that really helped at all. 3 days later, the gang takes a stroll through town, and Katara and Aang are chatting about the Leling thing. Aang thinks now, with some space from the event, that taking Leling's bending wouldn't have solved anything. It was her prejudices that were the problem, not the fact that she could chuck rocks all over the place. And I agree, actually. This was a very tough situation Aang was written into, and I think that mindset may not be wholly correct in the idea that taking her bending wouldn't have accomplished anything, but it is still the mindset I also hold. Katara thinks back to the benders who didn't stand up and fight for the non-benders, though. Aang must have mentioned it, saying she's mad they didn't stand up for what's right. And I'm still over here like, they just look like average guys. Does the fact that they're benders instantly mean they can fight? Aang seemingly ignores that, though, and says, I think we should stick around Cranefish Town. This place needs our help, and Katara agrees. But Aang thinks, man, this place does need a better name, though, and if you look at the surrounding scenery, you'll probably notice this place will someday grow into Republic City from Korra. The end. I went into this one thinking it was gonna be good, and it was good. Definitely up there with The Rift for my favorites. There wasn't a lot of fat here. Every scene had a purpose, every line. Everything was extremely tight, and in the face of some of the other comics where there were some secondary storylines at least I didn't care for, and I can't imagine most people did, this one hits you in the face with one laser-focused problem, and it shines for it. Leling as a villain was probably the weakest part. All she did was smugly smile at everything and shout bigotry, and her motivation was kind of insane. And not insane in a whoa, she's crazy evil kind of way, but insane in a wait, what? sense. But Leling was only really the face of the overall problem. The gap between benders and non-benders, that divide was the real villain. And it's a big problem, a problem that isn't even close to being solved at the end, because all they did was take down Leling, the face. Not a lot of world building, not a lot of character, until Aang had to do some internal reckoning this chapter, just a really interesting conflict, with characters we already love. I think it worked. Patreon shoutouts, if you want to see 2 brand new videos from me, you can support me on Patreon for just a few bucks. Link, as always, is in the description below the video. Biggest shoutouts of all go to my top patrons. Agent Rhino, who climbed Mount Everest the fastest. Sure, okay, they had jet engines strapped to their boots, but it's like, whatever, man. Arrow Falcon Green, who keeps a fully framed window in the trunk of his car just so he can throw someone through it if he needs to. Gift Misher Von PTA, who has a festival named after them in Germany, and you would too if you drove off the giant eagle on Mount Zugspitz. Omega Fighter, who stopped a forest fire. What, that's not good enough? How many forest fires have you stopped? Fuck you. Sean Martin, who found and waved at the man on the moon, and he waved back, which caused a catastrophic tsunami, but now he has a new lunar friend. Stephanie Riches, who has a house that can jump higher than you. She hates that joke, so she invented the jumping house. Thomas Lautenbach, who delivered a pizza to the International Space Station in his 98 Coupe de Ville. Tiago Nascimento, who made a chair out of a bear skeleton. Bear chair. Tish Just Lee, who landed a plane using DK bongos. And Whitrow, who planted a tree over their arch nemesis's grave, so once it's fully grown, they can burn it down. And of course, my god, overanalyzers, Two Boots Are Beat, Alex Rodriguez Flores, Andrew Watchett, Austin Gallup, Daniel Anderson, Devoted 221, Dizzy Payne, Dominic Saint, Distant, Aaron Grace, It's Carton, Jackson, John Ajaka, Justin Fletchall, Mr. Freese, Nate Clone, Nicholas Abbott, Peter Bayron, Pogger White, Reese, Rocket Mist, Ryan Gregorikos, Ryan Maxwell, Samuel Vanderplatt, Super Snipper, Turp Bobs, and Bareface. Next up, we're finally through the comics, so something new.